Are you telling me that all 5 of them, in your view, were Hamas operatives?
I don't know that, and I cannot give you that answer. I can tell you that Anas specifically...
So I appreciate your candor. Thank you. So if you don't know...
You're welcome.
If you don't know, how can you possibly sanction the murder of what's possibly 4 innocent journalists, allowing that you believe Anas al-Sharif to be a Hamas operative?
So first of all, Anas was killed not in a targeted manner and not because he is a so-called journalist, and I say this in inverted commas, but because he is a Hamas operative. I don't know regarding the rest.
But how can you justify that? I appreciate it wasn't your action. I appreciate it, and I'm very grateful.
What happens when a British journalist refuses to be fed empty talking points? Well, you get exactly what went down when former Israeli MP Ruth Landy appeared on LBC with Nick Ferrari. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now let me set the stage. Ruth Landy came on the show ready to deliver the same well-rehearsed script we've heard for nearly 2 years: excuses, evasions, and the endless promise that evidence will be provided. But Nick Ferrari wasn't buying it. Not for a second. He gave her every chance, laid out the question clearly, and waited for an answer that never came. Instead, Ruth fell back on the same recycled lines, the same tired narrative that collapses the moment you hold it up against reality. And here's the beauty of it. Nick didn't let her dance around the issue. He pressed, he pushed, and when it was clear she had nothing new to offer, he cut the call short. Done. Over. Finished. Because at some point, enough really is enough, and Nick made sure his audience saw it for what it was: not journalism, not truth, but pure political spin exposed in real time. All right, let's roll the tape.
Let's bring into the conversation Ruth Wasserman-Lande, who has served as a member of parliament in Israel and is an expert in Arab affairs. When you see the defence being put forward by Israel for the actions regarding the journalists, how do you respond? Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on your platform.
Not at all.
Very, very clearly, there are and there have been journalists, so-called journalists in inverted commas, not all of them, but definitely those that have been killed, working for Al Jazeera and actually accompanying those nukhbas or the terrorists that went in on October 7th and documented themselves. There were so-called journalists accompanying them and actually live streaming all the atrocities and horrors, including opening the belly of a pregnant woman, and all of those things that were then put on Telegram and other social media platforms. Also, there were journalists who...
I wonder if we can restrict ourselves to those 5 from Al Jazeera. What evidence do you have that satisfies you that this was a valid action by the IDF?
So the IDF, as the spokesperson said, has indicated clearly that some things could be declassified, and they were declassified, and there were pictures provided, by the way, they're completely public, of the specific journalist, Anas, who was documented himself in Hamas uniform
but how
with weapons.
Recent was that, Ms. Wasserman-Lande? How recent was that?
No, very recent. The guy is a very young man in the territory, in Gaza and elsewhere. It was not years ago. This is very recent.
Well, the tracking document that's been put out dates back to 2023. But even if we allow that this gentleman was in some way working for Hamas, what of those who were with him?
It's not in some way, sir. I would like to stress, these are men who work for Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera...
Are you telling me that all 5 of them, in your view, were Hamas operatives?
I don't know that, and I cannot give you that answer. I can tell you that Anas specifically...
So I appreciate your candor. Thank you. So if you don't know...
You're welcome.
If you don't know, how can you possibly sanction the murder of what's possibly 4 innocent journalists, allowing that you believe Anas al-Sharif to be a Hamas operative?
So first of all, Anas was killed not in a targeted manner and not because he is a so-called journalist, and I say this in inverted commas, but because he is a Hamas operative. I don't know regarding the rest.
But how can you justify that? I appreciate it wasn't your action. I appreciate, and I'm very grateful that you come in as a former member of Knesset, but how can you justify 4 innocent journalists, or I think one of them was a field producer, so go ahead.
I'm trying to answer. I can, and I do have the information that the Israeli policy, as opposed to what that French journalist said prior to my speaking, is absolutely not to target innocent civilians and or journalists. And any and all evidence that needs to be declassified to show that not only Anas, but the other 4 are not innocent civilians will be provided. There is no policy by the Israeli IDF and or government to target journalists. This is not something that we do. On the contrary, we are convinced.
But why is it then that figures from the 2 organizations, Independent Freedom Journalists and the CPJ, says that 274 journalists have been killed in various operations in Gaza, 269 of them are Palestinian? How can you possibly say the IDF isn't killing journalists?
Because the IDF is killing operatives that work for the Hamas.
All 274 now, are they? They're all Hamas.
The Hamas, it's a pity that you are laughing because I'm
not laughing. I just find, I say to you, I find it risible that you want my listeners to believe of the 274 journalists who've died since the 11th of August 2025, numbers certified by 2 separate organizations, respectfully, 269 of them of whom were Palestinian. You want my listeners to believe they were all journalists. That's what I find risible.
So respectfully, sir, if I may finish a full sentence, please. Perhaps I will allow your listeners to have a little bit more information.
Please.
The Palestinian Gazans who have been hired by Al Jazeera to be so-called journalists, by the way, not a few of them had actually taken hostages and tortured our hostages, and this has been a proven point told by hostages that have been given back in agreed upon agreements with the Hamas. So those so-called journalists have been in Gaza, young people. They've been in the indoctrinating process of Hamas for the past 20 years. They have been so-called covering the so-called horrors of Israel and accompanying Hamas operatives all along.
All right. All 274 then, you believe, lastly?
First of all, 274 is a number that has been given by whom?
By whom? By the 2 separate organizations, the Committee for the Protection of Journalists and the Independent Freedom of Journalists organization, so both journalists' bodies.
Okay, so those journalist bodies...
They're lying as well,
give
are they,
the
Ruth?
Names, if they... Why are you putting words in my mouth, may I ask? Did I say that?
Because you've disputed every single figure that's been put forward.
I've not disputed. I am saying
you disputed
a fact,
Reporters Sans Frontières. I would imagine you will dispute these 2 so that's 3 separate organizations that put these figures out, Ruth.
I have not disputed. What I'm saying is very simple.
Right.
The Hamas and organizations are saying that Israel is targeting journalists. I am telling you, Israel is not targeting journalists. What is happening is that Israel is targeting Hamas operatives that are killing our people, and by the way, killing Palestinians as well, on a daily basis, by the way.
I'm grateful for your time. Thank you. I must leave it there. Thank you for your time, Ruth Wasserman-Lande.
Let's be absolutely clear about what happened here. This was no accident. This was no random strike. This was a direct, deliberate airstrike on a tent where Al Jazeera journalists and camera operators were working. In that moment, Anas, along with 5 of his colleagues, was wiped out instantly. And here's the part that should make every listener's jaw drop. When pressed, Ruth openly admitted she had no idea if the others had any connection to Hamas. None. 0. She essentially confirmed, in her own words, that there was no evidence, no justification for their deaths. Think about that. If you don't even know who they were, how can you possibly defend their killing? How can you spin that as anything other than what it was? And yet with a straight face she repeats the same line. Israel doesn't target innocent civilians or journalists, but the numbers speak louder than any soundbite. 274 journalists have now been killed by Israeli airstrikes. 274. At what point do we stop pretending this is just collateral damage? The evidence, she says, will be provided. That's always the promise, isn't it? Evidence will come later. But we've been waiting, and waiting, and waiting. Meanwhile, more lives are lost, more journalists silenced, while the excuses pile up higher than the rubble left behind. And here's the recurring theme we've all seen before. The promise of evidence that never arrives. We're still waiting for proof to back up the claims about food shelters, hospitals, schools, and even this so-called 350 miles of tunnels that supposedly justify endless strikes. Every time it's the same story. We'll show the evidence later. But later never comes. Instead, we get empty words and shifting excuses. And then, unbelievably, Ruth turns around and scolds Nick for laughing. She actually says it's a pity he's laughing. No, the real pity is that she expected anyone to sit there and take her answers seriously. If anything, Nick should have laughed harder. He should have laughed at every single hollow claim, every contradiction, every dodge she threw out. Because the truth is, once you peel back the spin, there was nothing left to defend. That's why Nick cut it short. He knew the audience didn't need another 20 minutes of circular talking points. The mask had already slipped. The contradictions were out in the open, and viewers could see it for themselves, plain and undeniable. And that's where we'll leave it. What do you think? Was Nick right to shut it down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. Until next time, this has been The Whip Line. Thanks for tuning in.